All right, so this is not the our shiny tools for data management. So with the kind of switch in schedule, this went from a 20-minute talk to 40 minutes. So we should have plenty of times for any questions that people have. Before I begin, just want to thank Joseph and Casey for taking a look at this talk, providing valuable comments and helping prepare. And then really huge, big shout out to Polly Gibson. You'll see a lot of figures in here that come directly from a report where we did a comparison of our traditional creel with an E-Creel approach. And so she did all that work. So a huge shout out to her. And then to all the creelers that have collected these data over the past several years. This work was funded by Fish and Wildlife Service through the Lower Snake River Compensation Program. Shout out to them as well. So just a quick overview. I want to kind of talk about the importance of our harvest monitoring. I give an overview of the traditional creel, E-Creel methods, our comparison, pros and cons of the E-Creel, and what our future plans are after we've learned a little bit. A little bit of lag time on this. There we go. So there's multiple objectives for the Lower Snake Compensation Program, but kind of the primary one is to reestablish these historic tribal and recreational fisheries that were lost with the completion of the 4 Lower Snake dams. So all these fisheries are guided by a fishery management and evaluation plan. And within that, we're directed to ensure that we limit impacts to native steelhead, and determining our success in doing so is crucial to being able to hold these fisheries. So we're tasked with monitoring the incidental mortality of any wild steelhead that are caught and released, as well as the harvest hatchery steelhead. So in addition to tracking our harvest towards meeting the compensation goals, the overall steelhead harvest and then the wild impacts are used for our run reconstructions, as well as hatchery propagation performance metrics, such as smolt to adult returns, which in our case would be the proportion of smolts that return to the compensation area above Lower Granite Dam, or smolt to adult survival, which would be the same thing, but to the mouth of the Columbia, as well as our PHOS estimates, which would be the percent of hatchery origin spawners in nature. So for roughly 40 years, we have done a traditional creel survey on our steelhead fisheries. These were a combination of roving and access point creel surveys. We have done roving surveys on the Lower Grande Ronde River, as well as the Wallowa. And in the Imnaha, we did a combination of both, just because the road is extremely treacherous. There have been fatalities of people traveling the road down to access the fisheries. So just for a safety reason, let's see if you can see it here. It's really small. Right around here, midpoint at Fence Creek is where we would set up a checkpoint station traditionally. There's one road in, one road out. So it's pretty effective in getting people as they leave, but you might miss interviews by people who haven't completed their trips. So this is a random stratified sample. We would do 50% of weekends and holidays in a month, as well as 30% of the weekdays. And on the Imnaha and Wallowa, due to staffing, budget, we would only creel from February through April. And on the Grande Ronde, this is a collaborative effort with WDFW. Try to get my pointer to show up here. There it is. So right here in the dash is the state line. There's a section open to fishing here in Washington that extends to right about here with public road access the whole way along it. So we would creel the entire river, Washington section and Oregon, up to Wildcat Bridge, which is at the top of the highlighted area, from September through December. And then they would take things over from January through April. Over time, due to really low usage in April, and other priorities like getting ready for their spring Chinook creels and just kind of wrapping things up and QAQCing all their data. We dropped April, and so it was just January through March. Okay, so with traditional creel, there's several logistic challenges. That map that I just shared, I mean, it shows a lot of highlighted areas creeled, and technically we did cover those areas, but I have to caution that there's a ton of private land and wilderness in these areas that limit our access. And so on the Imnaha, a lot of that highlighted area is private, and we essentially could sample the lower section and then in the town of Imnaha. And in the Grande Ronde, that's the only place where that highlighted section is pretty accurate. We have a road going along that whole section. And then in the Wallowa, we have large areas of wilderness and the kind of downstream sections, and then large areas of private land in the upper sections. So in total, we have about 317 kilometers open to steelhead angling, but only about 22% of it has boots on the ground and high interactions with anglers. Also, these fisheries are geographically distant from La Grande. So you look at the round trip drive times, we got 6 hours to and from the Imnaha, 5 to the Grande Ronde, and 2 hours to the Wallowa. And that takes up quite a bit of time during creel shifts. Day trips to the Imnaha, you're not getting much creel done if you're trying to send someone from La Grande. And then cost and hiring. With this traditional creel, we would have an individual short-term creeler for each different fishery. And, you know, there's the hiring process that always takes much longer than it needs to. And then if you are able to effectively hire someone for each one of those fisheries, then you need 3 vehicles. We're doing 40+ hour weeks on each fishery, and that would lead to overtime, per diem costs, and lodging in some cases. So pretty time consuming, pretty costly. And there's some other challenges associated with this. I mentioned before that with these budget constraints, we were only able to sample a partial season for the Imnaha and Wallowa. The traditional creel is also a random sample of time where you would expand your catch, harvest, and wild fish released based on the amount of time sampled over the season. So that involves having daily pressure counts to estimate your effort. So 3 times a day, the creeler would need to drive the entire section, count every single angler actively angling. That leads to a lot of missed interviews, especially combined with the drive times. And then with the random sample of time, you know, there's no selecting the best days for fishing, and the nature of these fisheries, you know, should have been here yesterday. So environmental impacts like weather, high flows, really turbid water, even the run timing of the fish delayed by water temperature, this, that, and the other have big effects on really being able to effectively creel. And with the random sample of time, you might effectively sample a lot of zeros and not the highest harvest days. And the last part of it is paper harvest cards. So I'll kind of get into this as we talk about the transition to an electronic license system. But traditionally, we used a paper harvest card. In Oregon, to angle for steelhead, among other species, you have to validate your harvest. Traditionally, it was with this paper harvest card. And we could use expansions for the areas that we weren't able to effectively creel. And these were using correction factors developed in the 1960s, and things may have changed since then. They might not be appropriate. And there's about a 2-year lag time to get any results from those paper harvest cards. So people want data yesterday, and trying to keep up with that was very problematic. Annuals were on a delay because of that, and these expansions are no longer going to be provided. So, as I mentioned, all anglers must possess valid combined angling tag and must immediately validate their harvest. And in 2018, ODFW instituted an electronic license system to tag these harvested fish. And the ELS system, one of the big benefits is that, paper tags were returned voluntarily. So to be legal, you had to mark it, but you didn't have to turn it back in. With the ELS system, as soon as you validate it, that record is we're gonna get those records. So,
Interesting. You didn't have to turn it back in.
Unlike Washington,
yeah.
where you have to return it. I'm good about that.
So you ended up with nulls instead of zeros or whatever. I presume that if they didn't catch anything, then they wouldn't fill it out, so they wouldn't turn it. So you're like zero,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
Boy,
Sorry.
I feel, man.
That would pass.
Or drive 7 hours each
That would
way.
pass.
Yeah.
Mike's bringing us into the future. So anglers can continue to use those paper harvest cards, and it'd be nice if we could force everyone to transition to the system, but I don't really foresee that happening anytime soon. So that the hope is that over time we're gonna see, everyone's got their smartphone with them all the time. We're gonna see a lot higher use in the future, and I can say that when this first rolled out, I think it was about 30% of statewide anglers were using the app, and I don't have the number off the top of my head today, but it's a lot closer to 50% now. So over time, there should just be a lot more people using ELS than paper.
Might even be pushing the upper 50s, pushing 60.
Are you using thermal paper for the paper part?
I honestly have never seen a paper tag.
I think people just printing on their home printers.
What? No way.
Ow.
That's the way we're going, so I'm curious.
Wow.
Yeah, you get both. There is normal stuff as
Okay.
well as people can put
I
it.
was gonna say, dependent on where you got it from.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a point of sale system, but we discontinued it. So I used to have to get a tag from a vendor, but that's basically been discontinued.
That's the direction we're going, so I'm curious about your afraid of that, but.
But you get it in Washington, you still get it in the mail. You get the paper one in the mail.
Right,
That
but
you
the
fill out.
people making the thermal paper are fewer and fewer. And the supply issues surrounding that has pushed the expense of that up. The suppliers are, actually there's one now, and they're more expensive, so we're looking in that if possible.
Cool. So you can have a paper tag, it just costs you $25 more?
Oh, that'd be an
Would
incentive.
require old timers to print it out themselves if they wanted a paper tag instead of through the phone.
Yeah, I
Save
think
old-timers.
that's weird.
But I too ever didn't want to use their phone.
Yeah, and I think that's usually your gap rate is the older anglers are more reluctant.
That's the assumption.
Yeah.
Could be anybody.
Well, it's also like for youth that don't have their own
Yeah.
smartphone.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
They're still supposed to carry a paper tag.
Or other situations. Anyway, but there's probably been a consternation about this changeover,
Yeah.
and that would require everyone really to eventually use electronic.
And as we get into this, we would, kind of one of the results that we found is that there is different app usage by fishery. So it's, one approach would be to kind of use app usage statewide in your estimates. Other is to use what you're actually seeing on the ground, and that really affects your precision and your estimate. But we'll get into that later. And I guess
So like you, the other aspect of this is greatly expanding Creel to prove that.
So the last thing I wanted to mention about the ELS system is that these records are submitted immediately. They can be done offline, but then the person, when they come back online, might forget for a week or two to submit it. But I mean, far better than waiting 2 years. So it provides near real-time harvest monitoring, and ODFW has been working on this data dashboard that hopefully in the future we'll be able to access these records. Currently, I get these through request and kind of after the season, but it would be nice in the future. It's possible that I'll be able to, you know, once a week or nightly or something like that, take a look at how many records have been submitted, and kind of use that to help with scheduling your creel shifts and stuff like that.
So does the angler have to actually sync the app to get the record uploaded? They have to do that directly
So-
or automatically?
Yeah, so I've used this for 4 years, almost 4 years now, and usually you toggle it to field mode to save your battery when you're out in some remote area. If you're fishing somewhere urban, don't need to do that. You would tag your fish, it'd immediately be in there. But when you come back into service, your app is still in field mode, and it'll give you a notification, would you like to sync your harvest? And so that's kind of a nice reminder to do so.
Does the Idaho one have that reminder?
No, but your phone starts going off as soon as you get a service. So, but sometimes it freaks you out because you're not expecting it.
Yeah.
You know, all of a sudden you get like some sort of straight line of sight on a cell phone tower that is over the horizon. It's just like, all right, send.
Okay, so what is an E-Creel? Well, Josh McCormick was ahead of the curve. So prior to the rollout, he did a theoretical case study, and he kind of modeled what this would look like using a smartphone app to tag fish. He found that precision could increase up to 3 times what we get from paper harvest cards and non-reporting bias and whatnot. And then a few years later, Brian Riggers and Michelle Jones implemented a field study on coastal Chinook fisheries, and they did a hybrid creel where they paired the ELS harvest records with supplemental on-site interviews to estimate harvest. This is a 2-sample mark recap framework. So your fish tagged in the ELS system would be your mark event, and then your app tagged fish that are observed by the creeler would be your recap. They found that their harvest estimates were not significantly different between methods. They found it to be up to 41% more precise, and then a 15% cost savings. In their case, that was about $25,000. So that kind of got us interested in this whole E-Creel thing. So there's several key assumptions to use this method. The first is that anglers are compliant in reporting their harvest. We know that doesn't happen 100% of the time. 2, harvest reported by anglers using the app, and then the subsequent reporting of which method they use to the creel surveyor are independent of each other. The harvest and license type are reported accurately to the surveyor, that they report their harvest location accurately. This could be something that affects our estimates. It could be an assumption that we're violating. I have a map further on showing our location codes, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. But I'll talk about that later. The next one is that all anglers are equally susceptible to being interviewed. You get a spatially representative random sample of harvested fish across the fishery. Total harvest at the end of the season approximates a closed population, and that this is a big one. E-tagging harvest ratios don't differ significantly in time and space within a basin. Talk about that a little bit more. So, kind of the first, our first step into the E-Creel waters was to compare our traditional methods, our estimates and precision from a traditional versus estimates using an E-Creel method. So we utilized the data that was already collected. So it's not a true E-Creel because these were collected using the traditional method. So still a partial season, still a random sample of time with pressure counts and days where you weren't likely to find any harvest. And so any improvements that we might see in this comparison would likely be greater with a true E-Creel. And we utilized 4 years of data for this. And when I start showing the figures, these seasons span 2 calendar years. So we would use like the second year of a season. So 2019 would be 2018, 2019 season, et cetera, et cetera. And just as a quick aside, I wanted to mention Survey 123. This kind of seemed like it went hand in hand with the E-Creel and the ELS system, but this has been a game changer for us. We switched to electronic data entry in 2020, and this has saved so much time from when all this Creel data, when they're collected by hand on paper and then needed to be put into Excel and QAQC and all that. But yeah, we use these Survey 123 forms. They're really easy for the Creelers to use, and we began asking for the harvest tag type in the 2020-21 season. So some of the figures that are just displaying ELS harvest records will go back to the 2018-19 season, because that's the first year we had data, but we couldn't begin comparisons until this 2020-21 season. And one of the huge benefits with using this electronic data entry is we have always compiled these biweekly reports that are distributed to ODFW and the general public, kind of keep tabs on the steelhead season. And it's really easy to do now. They used to take a lot more time. And, they take about a half hour to compile these days. And then we're able to take this electronic data and use R scripts to pull the QAQC data, generate our harvest estimates and wild impacts. So back to E-Creel. I guess I'll start with this map because I had mentioned accurate reporting. I really wish I had a laser pointer, but on the Willata River there, you can see that.
It's actually better. So phone line can see it.
Oh yeah, let me just.
You can use a
Use your mic.
There you go.
So, no.
Use the mouse.
Yeah, you can use the mouse, then the people online also.
All right.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, as we all try and adapt the fancy new things that we can do.
So on this map, the different colors would be different harvest zones in the electronic license system. This isn't displaying every single harvest zone in Northeast Oregon. The Upper Grande Ronde River and Catherine Creek are open to angling, but there are very, very few hatchery fish that ever, I guess, take a wrong turn and go those areas. There's no supplementation in those areas, and it's mostly private land. So it's like pretty much impossible to creel. There's very little angling. And if they were to catch something, it's very likely to be a wild fish and not hatchery. So the other point is right here on the Wallowa River by Minham State Park. You see two colors there. The blue is section 234. The purple is section 235. The kind of, I guess, circles around the areas would be the areas where we have roadside access and can really effectively creel. This kind of overlapping zone on the Wallowa, in the regulations, 234 says confluence of the Wallowa River and Grande Ronde to Minham State Park. And section 235 says above Minham State Park. Well, the state park has tons of parking, camping, amenities, restrooms, picnic tables, campsites, tons of fishing there. So are anglers accurately reporting? Are they in 234? Are they in 235? This, I think, is an area that we can investigate further, that we might be violating that assumption. So I just wanted to.
And Minham State Park's long too. It's not like, it's a, I don't know, half mile, 3/4 of a mile long.
You don't have, I mean, obviously the intent is a point along the stream. There's no yellow rock, big rock kind of thing there. I mean, obviously that's more for a rule that, as opposed to reporting. Typically, I mean, usually it's, you know, you can't angle out of the boat until you're below this yellow rock or whatever. This is a little different if it's just for reporting. The fishing rigs are the same, whether you're below the park or above the park. It seems like, yeah, you need to get more specific with the description.
And then further downstream in this section, there's the interface of the Grande Ronde and the Wallowa River, known locally as Rondawa. And this is at times an extremely popular area. They used to be able to drive vehicles directly down there, and it's now protected as like an elk and deer wintering habitat, protected area, so no motorized vehicles down there. The anglers still find their way down there on four-wheelers, but this has always been a really, really difficult place to access. And it's another area that, you know, the kind of confluence is right at a big train bridge. So if you're fishing below it, technically you're in the middle Grande Ronde. You should be using section 232 in yellow. If you're above it, you're in the Wallowa River. You should be using section 234 in blue. But we've got two areas there where anglers could be just putting their harvest in the wrong zone, and we don't really have a good idea of that at this moment. So moving on. For our comparison, we decided to use a subset of ELS records that overlapped temporally and spatially with the traditional creel. And how this looks is that all harvested steelhead that are tagged in the system represent the mark event. Our creel technician would go out on the landscape, interview anglers, and observe harvested fish. The number of observed harvests that are marked in ELS are the recaptures, and the proportion of these recaptures to the overall fish observed during the interviews is what's called the E-tag ratio, and you'll see that in some of the figures. And so our total harvest is estimated by expanding the number of ELS records by that E-tag ratio. And you can probably see it better if you're online, but it's a pretty simple equation to estimate this. It's just a Peterson estimate. We use the Chapman modification for small sample sizes. Okay. So how many fish are there?
Never mind. I was trying to make the task bar disappear. So you couldn't see the bottom of your slides.
Oh, gotcha.
Online, yeah.
You can just go to view if you want.
I can see it on my,
People
I
online can
just-
see it well.
And just focus on content, see if that helps. Yeah, makes it bigger.
A little bigger.
Ah,
Eh, it's not-
why?
Just move the cursor off it now, so Mari.
I'll get a picture.
Alright, so how many fish are tagged using the app? This is one of the first things we wanted to look at, due to that assumption that the E-tag harvest ratios wouldn't differ significantly in time and space within a basin. We have, start here on this figure on the left. So we have our run year on the x-axis and then the number of ELS harvest records on the y. And as you can see, these harvest records tagged using the app increased over time, pretty much across the board. A little bit of variability, but general increase in use. I would point out this also coincided with 2019, 20, 21, 22. We had some pretty poor return years. Things started to look a lot better in 23, 24. So maybe a little bit of adoption of the app, but probably a lot of it is just due to there being more fish to harvest. And then in the lower right, we have the app versus paper harvested fish. So you have app harvest in red, paper harvest in blue, and the numbers in the box would be the proportion that are tagged in the app. So on the lower Grande Ronde, I'd say that's pretty consistent between app and paper usage. But if you look at the Anaha, we've got 2 years of really, really low app use, 2 years of really, really high app use. And also, if you look at the number of fish, it's really low sample sizes. So I think we don't know the true app usage on the Anaha until we're able to get more interviews at the right times and increase our samples there. This has been a problem for traditional creel, and at least in this comparison, it looks like it was in those initial years if we used the E-Creel with the traditional methods. And then for the Wallowa, we kind of have, it's kind of more variable, I guess. 3 years, it's 30% or less, and we had 1 year where it's about 46%, which is pretty good for generating estimates. So what we did find, just taking this quick look, was that harvest recorded with the app did vary over time and by basin. So found that we violated that assumption. The next thing we wanted to look at was our creel coverage adequate? We had heard over the years from our district bio that, there's a good fishery in the Anaha in the fall, but we never had someone down there during that time frame. And so going back and looking at our ELS harvest records, the red bars would be times that were not covered by traditional creel. The blue bars are times that are. So we can see that for the Anaha, we actually were missing the boat by not being out there in October and most years. And so the traditional creel was missing about 50% of that Anaha fishery. On the lower Grande Ronde, between us and Washington, we're out there the entire time. So we have 100% coverage, but the app only works for anglers in Oregon, so we can't use this method for harvest in Washington. And then the Middle Grande Ronde, if you remember back to the map of the ELS codes, that was that really long section in yellow. This is very inaccessible. It is only accessible by raft or at times a drift boat with enough flow. And it's a 3+ day float trip. And so it's really hard to creel that. The only way to creel it is to intercept those anglers when they're coming off the water. And through our best efforts, we've tried multiple ways of how to intercept these guys coming off the water, and just have struggled ever to get good data for the Middle Grande Ronde. So I'd say 0% coverage there. And then with the Wallowa fishery, again, we were beginning that February 1 each year. And so we were really missing the boat. The month of January, you look here, there's considerable harvests that we're missing. And even in that 23-24 run year, there's pretty good fishing in December that we missed. And using an E-Creel method, you'd be able to generate harvest estimates for this missed time. So we'll get into this in a little bit, but we decided to implement this last year in the 24-25 season. And so we expanded the time that we sampled the Wallowa and Naha to try to capture harvest during these time periods. And with the Wallowa, we made an extra effort with the creel technician to really capture the zone that the fish was tagged in, as well as the correct zone that they were creeling in. So what does this look like when we compare the ELS estimate with the traditional creel side by side? Here on the left, we have this 1-to-1 line, and as you can see, the Wallowa really didn't match up well with it. Really, on the Naha was the only fishery where it was pretty close. And we found that our traditional creel was probably underestimating harvest by about 20 to 40%, depending on the fishery. And on the right, we've got a couple graphs here showing the estimated harvest by run year for each of the fisheries. We've got Naha on the top, Lower Grande Ronde in the middle, and Wallowa. The green would be the E-Creel or the ELS estimate. The light blue would be our traditional creel estimate. And for the Wallowa, we included this third line that people online can see the full thing, but it's a dark green, and that's section 235 only, which would be the area that we have, roadside access for the entire fishery. So
Is that 'cause you're assuming that the ELS is more random than the traditional one? Is that, it's not the other way? Like you couldn't be overestimating with ELS?
I think the reason why we would say an underestimate of traditional versus an overestimate of E-Creel would be that the increased precision of the estimate.
So for this comparison, the data was limited to when we were just doing the creels. So we did our traditional creel and we were interviewing anglers and asking, we're using app or paper. So we kind of limited this analysis to just that time period. So not to inflate the
Oh, that helps. So that,
Yeah.
so that was confused because the red dots for the Unaha are right on the line there. But that's
Yeah.
only the spring period.
It's only spring period, yeah. So that doesn't include the fall period. So when Polly did the analysis, she kind of said, okay, well, we're only gonna consider the time when we were out active creeling with our creelers. We know there's this other
Doing
date.
both
Yeah,
essentially.
doing both at the same
Okay.
time, yeah.
That's fair.
And with the graphs, just wanted to show that, you know, while the E-Creel produced a larger estimate, you know, 300 fish didn't become 3,000 fish. So when we look at how the estimates generated, how they formed, it was more variable than what we expected. We have, I guess, the E-Creel estimate with the CV, and then traditional Creel estimate with CV. And on the far right, this column here would be the difference. So these negative values are saying that you have a more precise estimate with the traditional Creel. The positive values are more precise with the E-Creel approach. I guess E-Creel is a function of like your number of harvest observations, your E-tag ratio, and the number of recaps that you're able to get through Creel. So it seemed like when less than a third of your fish were E-tagged, then traditional Creel would perform better than the E-Creel. So just, I guess, something that needs to be considered if you're considering using this method. Either to take a look at previous year's data, do a comparison like we did, and kind of see what your E-tag ratio is, or look at missed time periods to kind of focus and prioritize on areas that you're missing to get more of those E-tagged fish. So yeah, it was kind of mixed. I think it was, let's see, 7 of the 12 comparisons, E-Creel improved precision, but we expected it to be a lot more skewed towards E-Creel being a better approach. So we talked about it earlier, and one of our really big responsibilities is estimating our wild impacts. So how do you do this when ELS records harvest only and all wild fish must be released unharmed immediately? So we chose an approach of using the harvest estimate along with the wild catch to harvest ratio to estimate wild catch. And I have the graphs here on the right, and Feldhaus on the top, Lower Grande Ronde in the middle, and Wallowa on the bottom. Again, the E-Creel approach is in the light green, the traditional Creel is in the light blue. And for the Wallowa, we provided the section 235 only. And again, these were pretty close on the wild impact estimates. Again, 300 fish didn't turn into 3,000. So we feel pretty good about this approach. And I just want to show an example of why. So last year we had an estimated 8,000 natural adults return to the Grande Ronde Basin. We want to keep impact rate below 4%. So that would be up to 320 dead steelhead.
Natural steelhead.
So we assume a conservative 5% hooking mortality. Several recent studies show that that is probably way more conservative than necessary. So if we take those 320 dead fish by 5%, we could have up to 6,400 wild fish caught and released before we make an unacceptable impact on our natural adults. So no matter which estimate we use, whether it's the traditional creel or the E-Creel, we're not going to come close to that many encounters. And I would just say proceed with caution if you do have really high wild fish encounter rates.
So what is your hooking mortality? Or like it's less than 5%, but how much less? Or how did you estimate?
Current one, the actual one.
That would have come from a study, right? Because you didn't calculate that specific in this.
No,
Yeah.
no, that's not an estimated 5% hooking mortality. It's just a number we use to
Yeah,
make sure we don't go above.
Would we know what it is from a study or anything?
There's
Yeah, I mean-
a variety of literature.
Yeah.
None of it's really definitive, but 5% is.
A safe one.
yeah,
It's thought to be conservative.
yeah.
I guess the only question I have is that, yeah, I mean, aligned with these particular conditions, you know, like, I don't know, the temperatures are, for example, you know, were those studies done in similar environments?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You talk about runtime being this many?
No, but that's a good point to bring up. So there is a difference in run timing with our wild adults appearing later than our hatchery. And kind of our harvest goes down throughout a season. You know, the fish quality is not that great once you get into late March and early April when the wild fish are showing up. And then the Wallowa fishery and the Amnaha fishery are predominantly hatchery fish. The Grande Ronde is more of a 50-50. There's a lot more wild encounters down there, but we don't get a lot of wild fish back to the Wallowa or Amnaha. And so between those fisheries, kind of the Wallowa fishery, yes, we missed a lot of harvest in January previously, but it's pretty much a spring fishery. And then the harvest is really low when the small number of wild fish are in there. And the Amnaha fishery is kind of the same. The Grande Ronde, I guess it's about 50-50 wild and hatchery fish encounters. And then as the season goes on, it's primarily a wild fish fishery. Water temperatures are really cold during that spring.
Not an issue, yeah.
And then by mid to late March, depending on the year, the environmental conditions, I mean, it blows out several times. So by mid to late March, there's not much being caught down there.
Yes, there's a difference in runtime between our hatchery and natural fish, and their abundance and space and time is not the same either. So in the lower Grande Ronde down by Troy, you're gonna have more wild and happy fish kind of mix, but as they go up the system, the wild fish are peeling off, going to the Grande Ronde, going into the Minam. So by the time they get into the Wallowa River itself, where we can access the fishery, it's a higher proportion of hatchery fish than wild fish. I mean, they're still wild fish, but many of those wild fish have peeled out. So there's a lot of moving parts here, so it's hard to like take one assumption and apply it to the whole system. So hatchery fish do a good job of going home. We have really low stray rates.
So last year, we decided to rip off the Band-Aid and try to actually implement an E-Creel. We did not do this for the Grande Ronde due to that kind of reciprocal monitoring agreement with Washington. But for the Amnaha and Wallowa, we used a flexible schedule in order to creel both of these fisheries during times that we previously were missing. So we tried to get out there during those fall fisheries. So for the Amnaha, we had creelers available. October's a really busy time for us. And we were able to get out there only one time in October, but then had pretty good coverage in November. Unfortunately, fishing was really good in October and it appeared that we missed it. We only got 2 out of 35 fish that were tagged in the system in October because we didn't go out there enough.
Our Naha Creeler departed this morning. It's on his way today.
So kind of one of the things we learned was that, 78% of our Naha harvest occurred in 2 months, October and March. So we had great coverage in March, but because we missed a lot of the harvest in October, our estimate wasn't as precise as what we had for the Grande Ronde and Willow. Really happy with these CVs. We shoot for a CV of less than 15%. So we approached that in the Naha, but by taking what we learned last year and making October a big priority this year, we've got people scheduled almost every weekend in October this year. Still trying to get the one weekend schedule that isn't currently, but hopefully our estimates next year will fall below that 15%.
I need more
Yeah,
about
quick question on that. So when there's interviews, are the anglers being asked if they're using ELS regardless of whether they harvested or not?
That's, I'd have to open it up. I don't think so. I think that we have it set up that when a fish is harvested, then it pops up to ask that license type question. But I'd have to open the survey and look at to see if that's the standard question before we get into fish specific data.
Okay.
But
Yeah, I was wondering if you went back to your example, October, there were 35 marks, but only 2 recaps. But then November, there was higher coverage. Last year, if you could look back and see what the ELS use ratio was in November, and if it was consistent with October, and if so, then maybe you could extrapolate backwards.
Then we had worse fishermen.
Right, yeah, that's a risk for sure, but I mean, because the McCormick paper uses a simplified version of, it's the ELS ratio that's mathematically the same as a mark recap. So if you have that value, you can use it more broadly across time, as long as we can test whether there's no differences through space and time.
that is, I should bring that up. That's something, yeah, as soon as it's done, I'll go take a look at that, and we might be republishing the survey on Monday. It's, Garrett gets back from the Naha.
Hey, you're still in cell reception. You got time to catch him in Enterprise.
All right, so I just want to get into some of the pros and cons of this E-Creel approach. So E-Creel provides a straightforward and consistent way to account for all harvest anywhere in the basin. So we showed the missed harvest. We showed these inaccessible wilderness areas that require a 3-day float. We can apply either the E-tag ratio from a contiguous area that we would make the assumption that they would have similar rates of use to that to generate an estimate for those areas that previously weren't covered. We found similar estimates to traditional, just as Riggers and Jones did, but our precision varied among years, and the differences were often small between the 2 methods. And so I just want to point out that the analytical estimates of variance don't account for variability due to violating our key assumptions. So that's something we need to continue to look at and kind of refine our approach as we learn more. And then this can lead to a really big reduction in effort to produce an unbiased estimate. So one of the things we did last year, rather than attempting to hire 3 separate creelers for short duration positions that, you know, would require for them to find housing, for a 3-month position, we were able to extend 1 creeler for a 6-month position to cover all 3 fisheries. And that was a huge cost savings and time savings. Near instantaneous harvest monitoring. We can produce the estimates for the remote areas. We can utilize things like flow gauges and weather reports, ELS records, and detections on our pit arrays to come up with schedules and try to really pinpoint the right times to send a creeler to a specific location, rather than a random sample of time each month. And then also we can focus interviews on anglers who have caught fish. So it's not as important to interview every single angler and capture the ones that haven't caught anything. I mentioned that state park fishery, at times it's kind of chaotic with how many people there are. And with a traditional, you would need to continue to, you need to keep track. So you might have, you know, 50, 60 people fishing all in one area. And you got to quickly, as you see a guy land a fish, kind of stop interviewing one, go back through your form, find out, okay, is the guy in the red hat? Go interview him, et cetera, et cetera. So it just makes it a lot easier on the creeler on the ground when you can kind of focus on that when there's a lot of people to get through. And then some of the disadvantages are that we can't currently use this on the Grande Ronde. I know Washington is considering going to ELS system, and so we've seen that an E-Creel approach would produce a good unbiased estimate. So this could lead to reduced staffing time over those 6 months. We could reduce the number of creels needed. I can share a figure after the talk, but one of the cool things Polly did was to kind of model the number of harvest observations you would need to produce that kind of unbiased estimate, based on the number of harvest observations that we would typically see and the observed E-tag ratio during those 4 years. So it's kind of a useful tool for people considering it, is to like take the data you already have and use that to figure out a schedule and like how much do you need to be out there? How much can you reduce and save some time and money? And then there's no direct estimate of catch and release angling. So if that's really important with your wild fish estimate because you have a high wild encounter rate, that's one disadvantage. And then we lose our indices of angler effort. I think that, you know, it is important that we know that anglers are utilizing these fisheries, but I think with these type of fisheries, you know, maybe your total angler effort in a year is a really useful information, but maybe not your catch rates and your, you know, we're measuring hours per fish, not fish per hour. It's not something we can manage on. A lot of stuff out of our control. So you do lose that.
So no direct estimate again, it's because it's not capturing that.
So it only captures the harvested fish. It doesn't capture time or encounters.
No. It's yeah.
Is it special like that?
Because we're not randomly sampling space and time. We're kind of like focusing our efforts on when fishermen are fishing and catching fish, and we're sampling fish, not necessarily time.
No, but like the electronic system. Or, yeah, like over time.
Yeah. All right. I can,
Pick your brain later.
yeah, we can end that here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Conclusion, fine, good. Just want to make sure we didn't sidetrack more of your time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
No, we'll just leave it on Joe's super sweet steelhead picture, but, you know, kind of big thing was, we produced good unbiased estimates. They weren't significantly different from, well, I shouldn't use that word, but they weren't that much different from our traditional creel. And we significantly reduced, I can't stop saying that word. We really reduced the number of creelers we needed, the amount of time out on the landscape, and saved ourselves some money, although I don't have that dollar amount or percent cost savings for you today.
And there's something to be said for the human safety part of it too, because like, if you're not out sampling in a snowstorm, you're not driving on nasty, horrible roads.
I mean, do you need a snowstorm for creel to be risky?
Yeah, no.
All right, we're gonna ask one question and then we have to move on to the next presenter, because today we have a few that aren't negotiable in terms of